Hello, everyone. I hope that you are all having a meaningful fast. I want to just share an outline, a frame of conduct for the 3 weeks that we just entered into, being that today is Shvat Asar B'Tammuz. But before we do so, we should at least give an introduction to what it is that we are commemorating today, why it is that we are fasting today. The Rambam writes in Perek Hey Halacha Beis in Hilchos Tanis, the Rambam writes that he outlines all of the fast days, and he says V'shva Asar B'Tammuz, that on the 17th of Tammuz, Chamisha Dvarim Irubo, there were 5 things that happened on Shva Asar B'Tammuz. Nishtabru Aluchos, number 1, the tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu, the first set of luchos that had the Aseret Hadibros written on them, that Moshe brought down from Har Sinai, broke on Shva Asar B'Tammuz. Ubitel Hatamid, the daily sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash during the Bayis Rishon, during the first temple period, we were stopped being brought on Shva Asar B'Tammuz. V'ukfu Yerushalayim b'Churban Shemini, and during the second temple period, the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, the walls of Yerushalayim, rather, were breached on that day. V'sarif apustopus harasha satorah, the Mishnah in Maseches Taanis tells us that Apostopos Harasha burnt a Sefer Torah. He burnt up a Sefer Torah, Rahman al-Islam, the Hamid Salem Bahechal. And an idol was placed in the Hechal, in the place of the temple. Because of these horrific tragedies that happened on Shva Asar B'Tammuz, so today is one of the 4 fast days that we commemorate for the destruction, that we observe for the commemoration of the destruction of the temple, including Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Teves, and of course Tisha B'Av, which is going to be in 3 weeks. And that's exactly what's going to be happening over this next 3-week period. This 3-week period, as is called the Bein HaMitzarim, the days between the tragedies, starting with Shva Asar B'Tammuz, which was really the last blow that brought forth the destruction of both Batei Mikdash. Shva Asar B'Tammuz leading up to Tisha B'Av, with the commemoration of the destruction of both Beis Hamikdashes. And that's why today we fast, and that's why we're going to be entering into this 3-week period of curtailing rejoicing, which is why we refrain from weddings during this period. Even though one would be allowed to get engaged during this period, weddings, though, we refrain from. And even if one does get engaged, that they should refrain from having lavish parties, dancing and musical instruments. One should refrain from during the 3 weeks, unless, of course, one is a musician. They need it for their parnasa in order to play for, let's say, non-Jews. They could do that until the 9 days. And these are just some of the halachos that pertain to the 3 weeks. We're going to discuss in more detail in just a second, but just to pause for a moment, Rabbi Soloveitchik said that a good framework to understand how the buildup works between now, Shva Asar B'Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av, in the morning that we're going to be commemorating and observing, he says it's very similar to a Avelis Chadasha, that the mourning one would do for the loss of a parent. That it starts with intense mourning, and that's Shiva, and then it moves into the Shloshim, which some of the observances that we had during Shiva are released, and then it enters into the Yud Beis Chodesh, the entire year, and there continues to be a year long of mourning, but with some leniencies that did not exist during the Shloshim, and of course did not exist during the Shiva. On the flip end, that's exactly what happens during Avelis Yeshana, during Avelis mourning of something of old. He says that we start with what would be considered like the Yud Beis Chodesh. The 3 weeks are like the year-long mourning for a parent. And then we add on, as we get closer to the Yom Mar, to that very, very horrific day of Tisha B'Av, we add on more. And that's for Ashkenazim, the 9 days, starting with Rosh Chodesh Av, and Sephardim, that would be Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av. And then we move into the week that Tisha B'Av falls, and then we move into Tisha B'Av proper, and that would be like Shiva. Some more halachos pertaining to the 3 weeks that one would need to be considerate of when it comes to, let's say, making a shechiyanu. Generally speaking, we refrain from making a shechiyanu. It would be an inappropriate bracha to say shechiyanu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. Thank you, Hashem, for bringing us to this time period. This is such a terrible time period. We wish we never gotten to this time period, because it's just a reminder that the Beis Hamikdash is still not here. And that, as the Yerushalmi tells us in Maseches Yom Daf Daled, that any generation that does not see the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt, ki'ilu hecharivo, it's as if they destroyed it, because had we bettered our actions, had we created more Avos Yisrael, so then the Beis Hamikdash would be here if we had more Avos Yisrael, as opposed to sinas chinam. And there, the Beis Hamikdash would be here. So it's as if we destroyed it. So we don't want this period. This period that we're in is not a good period that we entered into. And it's a reminder that we still do not have the Beis Hamikdash, and that Klal Yisrael still has not gotten their act together. And therefore, the bracha of Shechiyanu is something that we do not recite during this time period, with the exception of, let's say, certain life cycle events like a Pidyon Haben that a Shechiyanu would be recited at. This is why we refrain from taking haircuts or shaving. This applies equally to men and women, that we do not take haircuts, we do not shave during this time period. Even an adult should refrain from giving a child a haircut unless it's absolutely necessary until Shavua Shechabo, says the Mishnah Berurah, that one should refrain. If a person shaves, let's say, on a daily basis because of work and the like, so there may be leniencies, at least up until Shavua Shechabo, or till the 9 days for Ashkenazim. But if anyone has specific questions, they can speak to me directly. These are just some of the halachos, as I mentioned. If anyone has more specific questions related to the 3 weeks, things we refrain from, and not, again, the general perspective we should have is that this is not a happy time. This is not a time that we should necessarily be looking for loopholes of that. Let me try and squeeze in this activity because I want to be able to have a fun time. And it may be permitted, technically speaking, according to we want to have a perspective during this time period. We want to have a frame of mind during this time period of a more subdued, a time period of introspection, because this is a time that we should be working on ourselves, doubling our efforts to work on ourselves for Avos Yisrael and to ultimately do tshuva. That, the Rambam says, is really the whole purpose of a fast day. That what we're supposed to do today, the way we're supposed to act, says the Rambam, that there are days that all of Klal Yisrael fast during them because of the tragedies that befell the Jewish people during that time. In order to awaken the heart and set us on the path for teshuvah. And this should be a reminder to our evil ways, and the way that our forefathers act, that are like the way that we act ata. We haven't learned from our historical mistakes, that we make the same mistakes. Until there were tragedies befell them and tragedies that befall us today. How true this is over the last year and a half. The horrific tragedies that we've experienced, and just a few days ago with what happened in Surfside, it's horrific. It's the Maharal writes that if we had all the oceans were ink and the entire sky was parchment and every single branch in the world were pens and oil pens, that there would not be enough material for us to write all of the tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people, that have befallen us. And that's why it's incumbent upon us to use this opportunity that is Shva Asar B'Tammuz today, the 3 weeks that we have entered into, and hopefully, as it says in the Navi Zechariah, that we'll get to Tisha B'Av, and Tisha B'Av will be flipped to being a moed, will be a day of sason v'simcha lebeis Yehuda, will be a day of rejoicing and happiness, because Klal Yisrael got their act together during this time period and have entered into a state of true Ava. I wish everyone a meaningful fast, and a fast that they can engage in the tshuva process accordingly.